Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll examine a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with 8 Senate Democrats and 1 independent caving to end the government shutdown with little apparent gain in their strategy to hold out on funding the government for continued subsidies for the Affordable Care Act to avert skyrocketing healthcare premiums, which the Republicans compromised on, allowing for a vote on funding the subsidies in December that they are likely to vote down. Joining us is Jeet Heer, a national affairs correspondent for The Nation and the host of the weekly Nation podcast, The Time of Monsters. He also pens the monthly column Morbid Symptoms, and we will discuss his latest article at The Nation, After This Shutdown, Surrender, Chuck Schumer Needs to Go. Then we'll look into today's White House meeting with Syria's new leader, Ahmed al-Shara, who only a year ago had a U.S. bounty of $10 million on his head, but is now getting the golden handshake in the Oval Office. Joining us to assess what kind of a deal the former jihadi is getting is Joshua Landis, the Sandra Mackey Chair and Director of the Center for Middle East Studies and the Faresneh Family Center for Iranian and Persian Gulf Studies at the University of Oklahoma. The past president of the Syrian Studies Association. He is a fellow at the Quincy Institute and writes Syria Comment, a daily newsletter and blog on Syrian politics. Then finally, we'll assess Secretary of Defense Hegseth's meeting with defense contractors on Friday, at which he called for streamlined procurement and quicker delivery of weapons on a, quote, wartime footing, and speak with Jennifer Kavanagh, a senior fellow and director of military analysis at Defense Priorities, where her research focuses on U.S. military strategy, force structure, and defense budgeting, the defense industrial base, and U.S. military deployments and interventions. Previously, she was a senior fellow in the American Statecraft Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and she has an article at Responsible Statecraft we will discuss. Hegseth dropped big Venezuelan Easter egg into Quantico's speech. And before we begin with our tax dollars paying for the bombing of innocents abroad and racist thuggery at home, as families are ripped apart and neighbors disappeared from our streets, shops, and schools, we find ourselves at a moral moment when America's better angels have to be mobilized against a cruel and corrupt regime enabled by political cowardice and judicial blindness. The only way to save our democracy from its current descent into fascism is a massive mobilization of people power against a plutocratic-funded 2026 Trump campaign of voter suppression and intimidation by masked government thugs. As Trump cowers the owners of the press and defunds public broadcasting, Background Briefing needs your support to keep providing a reality-based daily briefing that exposes the regime's malevolent machinations to protect and defend our constitutional rights and freedom of speech and assembly. We ask you to make a tax-deductible donation at backgroundbriefing.org/donate or at our foundation, publictruthmedia.org, and thank you for defending the home of the brave and the land of the free. And joining us now, Jeet Heer, who's a national affairs correspondent for The Nation and the host of the weekly Nation podcast, The Time of Monsters. He also pens the monthly column Morbid Symptoms. And his latest article at The Nation is After This Shutdown, Surrender, Chuck Schumer Needs to Go. Welcome to Background Briefing, Jeet Heer.
Good to be on the program.
Well, thanks for joining us, Jeet. And of course, Ro Khanna, the Democratic congressman representing Silicon Valley, he's already echoed what you have said in the title, Chuck Schumer Needs to Go. My understanding is that Chuck Schumer was playing a kind of cynical double game. He voted against the cloture resolution to basically cave, but at the same time, apparently he encouraged the 8 members of his caucus to cave. Is that your understanding?
Oh yeah, no, I think one thing to keep in mind is that Chuck Schumer he's not just like an average senator, right? He's like the leader of the Democrats in the Senate. He's a Senate Minority Leader. And all of these negotiations were going through him. I believe Senator Sheenan from has said like he was involved in all the negotiations every step of the way. So this is something that even if Chuck Schumer votes against, he wants. I mean, and I think there's actually multiple levels of cynicism. I mean, I think the larger cynicism is something that Republicans said, which is that they said that, Democrats were just doing the shutdown as a way to stir up public anger against the Republican Party for the off-cycle elections, and that once the elections were over, the shutdown would end. And I'm afraid that that is what has happened.
Well, in a way, though, they were in a difficult situation, the Democrats, in as much as they're making a stand to protect the Affordable Care Act and to stop the premiums doubling and tripling, which obviously is something that will get a lot of the attention of the American electorate, including Republicans. But on the other hand, the food issue, starving or, making 1 in 8 Americans go hungry. And now Trump is going directly to the Supreme Court to stop the lower court judges from forcing him to feed these 42 million Americans. That's pretty basic. I think in a way, they seemed like they were trapped between two things. On the one hand, protecting healthcare. On the other hand, not really being able to do anything about stopping the destruction or the delay in SNAP.
Well, but I think the most recent Supreme Court decision, although it overturned a lower court hearing, it was designed to bring this decision to the Supreme Court as quickly as possible. And I actually think that at the level of the Supreme Court, it was looking pretty good for the Democrats. I think that I mean, I think it was very telling that it was Justice Jackson that had wanted to bring it to the Supreme Court. So, I mean, I actually don't think that that is. I mean, I don't think that that is what is driving this. It seems like from reporting, the major consideration was the filibuster, that Donald Trump was putting pressure on the Republican Party to end the shutdown through getting rid of the filibuster. And that if you look at the the 8 Democrats and Schumer, who all went along with this, these are all people who are very institutionalist and wanted to keep the filibuster. And to my mind, that's actually a very bad deal. Like I think if you had actually forced the Republicans to get rid of the filibuster, I think that would be good for American democracy in the long run. It would make many more things possible once for both Republicans and Democrats and create greater accountability. But also, it would have made great clarity. Like it would have been the case that the coming cuts to ACA and the coming rises in health insurance are clearly done by the Republicans. Now I think that the Democrats have muddied their own water and muddied their own message because I think that the Republicans can say with some degree of credibility that like the Democrats signed on for this. We couldn't have passed the cuts without the Democrats. So I think that I do actually think that healthcare costs are going to spiral out of control even more than they already have. And I think that the Democrats have lost some of the edge on that issue because of the way they handled this.
Right, but they think that when the vote, which has been agreed to uh, in December, is taken, obviously the Republicans will shut it down and kill the ACA or make it more difficult. And that's the Democrats are thinking they'll get a win there for electoral purposes. But when you say, Jeet, that the Democrats should have let them go ahead and kill the filibuster, Trump made that statement about killing the filibuster and ordering the Republicans to do so, sitting
Mhm.
next to Orban, this crook from Hungary, who has gerrymandered his way into power. And what Trump said at that meeting was that the Republican senators should kill the filibuster. And if they do, we will win the midterm elections and all general elections as a result. So, my God,
Yeah, yeah,
talk
but
about
I mean, Trump's statement doesn't really make, I mean, a lot of sense. Obviously, they're doing a lot of gerrymandering to try to hold on to power as much as they can. But I mean, the filibuster does not would not actually affect how the Senate is, and I think it would give greater clarity in the Senate. And I mean, I think in the long term. Getting if there hadn't been a filibuster, I think, for example, Joe Biden would have had been able to carry out a much more ambitious agenda and would have been able to pass things like voting rights, which people like Manchin stood against. So I actually think, like, forcing the issue of the filibuster um, would have been a great advantage. I think probably a majority of the Democrats in the Senate are now in favor of changing the filibuster, but I think that there were enough of them that are still institutionalist. So it seems like it's a very bad deal to, like, basically both give up on healthcare and give up on the filibuster. You're basically affirming in both cases that you're going to be weak. I just don't. To me, it's very hard to see what they got out of this. I mean, another way to put this is they could have had all the exact same results without a lot of, like, misery and layoffs and uncertainty if they had just never done the shutout at the government shutdown at all, right? Like.
right.
So
But
they could
if
have done this like 40 days ago. I so
right,
I mean, like, to me, this does actually make the Democrats look weak, and I don't think it's an accident that Roy Khanna and others, I believe Seth Moulton as well, are now calling for Schumer to go. I think that these cries will increase. I think that they're actually going to play out in the primaries next year. As it happens, like, almost all the Democrats who voted for this are not going to be up for primaries. I think they carefully selected ones who are either retiring or are not up for primaries till 2030. But I think in many other places, I think in Maine, I think the whole question of, are you going to stand with Chuck Schumer, or do you want more forceful leadership, is really going to roil the Democratic Party from now till the midterms.
right. I mean, well, some of them are up in 2028. But
Yeah.
on the filibuster, though, Jeet, Trump has made it clear that he wanted to end the filibuster so that he could rig the next election. And the Republicans would certainly go along with his agenda, which is to stop mail-in ballots and stop early voting and do anything and everything he can to win the next election. So I'm not sure that the Democrats, made a mistake because, frankly, isn't the real battle here to find some way to stop this guy because he's a catastrophe. He's a fascist. He's modeling himself on Putin, and he's also, I think, losing his marbles.
No,
There's a
but I mean,
lot at stake. I mean, the only way to
yeah,
stop
there's a
him
lot of
is
stake,
the
but I mean, the
midterms.
question is, how do Democrats in Congress relate to this? I mean, like, it seems to me the ultimate way to stop this is to have the public on your side, and I think certainly things like the No Kings protest, if you have enough people on the streets, I think that itself acts as a deterrent. But all of that is predicated on having a Democratic Party that people feel confident about, and Democrats have been doing very badly in sort of public approval polls, but that was improving throughout the course of the shutdown. It was improving because the Democrats in the Senate were seen as standing up to Trump and doing it. And now you have, Angus King, who's independent but votes with the Democrats, who said that went on MSNBC and said standing up to Trump didn't work. And I think if that's your message, not only are you showing yourself to be weak, but you're going to demoralize your own base. How are you going to get people out there for No Kings protest? There are a lot of people who are already, like in California, in Illinois, putting their own lives on the risk to, like, stop ICE and to, like, thwart this stuff. If you're asking that sort of sacrifice from ordinary people, then, like, how can you expect them to do that if they see the leadership of the opposition party as surrendering? I mean, it just doesn't seem like, in terms of the larger project of stopping Trump, like, this is demoralizing, and it undercuts what you want to do, which is to have a broad scale, coordinated movement that includes both lawmakers and citizens in any effort to jam up Trump's movement. So I mean, I think a lot of reasons people supported the shutdown was that it was seen as like, let's try to, see what you can do, what power you can have, and how you can exert some changes. And like they have really given up the ghost. They've given up, like they've folded. I actually don't see anything that they've gotten for the last 40 days of sacrifice, which were real sacrifices for like a lot of government workers. It seems like travesty to me.
Right. Well, it is extraordinary because what you're saying and what they should be doing, they did on last Tuesday, right? The
Yeah, well,
election.
they did. They did. And then I mean, the shutdown helped them. It did help them in the off-year elections because they were, and there's a lot of good polling showing that their numbers improved as the shutdown went along because people saw them as standing up. And now they've given all that up. So I don't know where this goes except like into a fight within the Democratic Party itself.
Well, that's got to make Trump happy, right? And I guess the only
Yeah.
silver lining is that Mikey Johnson's going to be forced to open up the House and stop protecting pedophiles and seat the Democratic congresswoman from Arizona who's been waiting for 6 weeks while they've been on vacation.
Yeah, although I wouldn't be surprised if that is still they find ways to roadblock that. I mean, like it actually does seem like the Republicans are happy to govern without Congress, which again is another thing problem with the kind of like ending the shutdown. Like I think like anything that like brought Congress and the Senate to the fore as like places where politics is done is important because Trump is trying to govern without these institutions.
Right, but Johnson said that they are going to come back. He's told them to
Oh, they
come
are.
back.
Okay, okay, okay. Oh, that's good. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So,
So I mean that is something. That is something. But
right.
we'll see how we'll see how this goes. Yeah. I mean I don't think the Democrats are have many. This is one of the few hands that they had to play, and they ended up not playing it very well. So I'm a little bit pessimistic right now.
So, of the eight that voted with the Republicans are Catherine Cortez Masto, Nevada, Dick Durbin, Illinois, John Fetterman, Pennsylvania, Maggie Hassan, New Hampshire, Tim Kaine, Virginia, Angus King, Maine, Jackie Rosen, Nevada, and Jean Shaheen, New Hampshire. Both Jean Shaheen and Dick Durbin are retiring.
Mhm.
So, and apparently he just wanted a little bit of a bill that he put through. So he sacrificed the Democrats for a small gain there. Um, and Tim Kaine, he voted obviously because he felt that since there's so many government workers in the state of
Mhm.
Virginia that he had to end their agony. But the other senator, Warner, didn't. He voted.
Yeah, Virginia. Yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah,
that's very telling.
yeah.
I think Kane was the sort of, I mean, I think that they very carefully selected the ones that were like, would suffer the least damage. He's not up until like 2030 is the next time he's going to face a primary. So I think that he has, a little bit more of a cushion. And institutional, an institutionalist. So I just, yeah, and I think that's true. I mean, like of the others, Hassan is up in 28, as is Cortez Masto. But I mean, the others are up in like 30, or Fetterman, who like I think is already like perhaps aware that this is his last term, at least as a Democratic senator. Um,
Right. I think he's going to be primary, doesn't he? I mean, people are
Yeah, yeah, he's
pretty
he's just looking very
disgusted with
bad in
him.
the primaries already. Like this is not gonna this is only like this was only like another candle thrown in the flame. So it's not
Right, but if he runs as an independent against a Democrat, he'll split the vote, right? And
yeah, yeah, I think that's what
A
the sort of plan
Republican will
is.
win, right?
Yeah, yeah.
He'll hand Pennsylvania to the Republicans,
Yeah, I think that is where he seems to be heading towards. Yes, yes.
right? So
Yeah, although I mean yeah, I mean I we'll see how he does. I feel like he's
he's a catastrophe.
yeah, that's right.
Well, I thank you for joining us. I appreciate it, Jeet here.
Oh yeah, no, no, it's always great to be on the program.
Well, thank you. And again, I've been speaking with Jeet here, who is a national affairs correspondent for The Nation and the host of the weekly Nation podcast, The Time of Monsters. He also pens the monthly column Morbid Symptoms. And his latest article at The Nation is After This Shutdown Surrender, Chuck Schumer Needs to Go. We're going to take a brief station break and back looking into today's White House meeting with Syria's new leader, Ahmed al-Shara, who only a year ago had a U.S. bounty of $10 million on his head, but is now getting the golden handshake in the Oval Office.
As they drag you by your feet, but the hangman isn't hanging, and they put you on the street. Yeah, you go back, Jack, do it again. Wheel turning round and round. You go back, Jack, do it again.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now, Joshua Landis, the Sandra Mackey Chair and the Director of the Center for Middle East Studies and the Farzaneh Family Center for Iranian and Persian Gulf Studies at the University of Oklahoma. The past president of the Syrian Studies Association, he is a fellow at the Quincy Institute and writes Syria Comment, a daily newsletter and blog on Syrian politics. Welcome to Background Briefing, Joshua Landis.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us. And Syria's new leader, Ahmed al-Shara, arrived at the White House today, didn't go through the normal West Wing driveway entrance, went sort of through the back door, was there for a couple of hours. It's significant, I guess. It's the first official visit of a Syrian leader since the country got independence from France in 1946. So what did you make of today's meeting? Not that we know a lot because it was closed to the press.
Right. We've had some visuals out because the Syrian team has been publishing on X and other places photos. The White House hasn't issued a lot of photos, but Syrians did. And so, but this was unusual because he went in a side door and he went out. But it's a big moment for President Shara. He is here on a charm campaign because he needs sanctions lifted. And the president has waived the sanctions for 6 months, but only the Congress can really reverse what are called the Caesar sanctions, which are the toughest bunch of sanctions, and make it a criminal venture for any international company to do business in Syria. So he needs those lifted, and the measure has passed the Senate, but not the House. So the big question then is, will the House vote to lift those sanctions and really set Syria on this new trajectory that the president is pushing for?
Well, the House hasn't been in session for 6 weeks.
Well, that's one of the problems. And this was designed a while ago, this meeting, but obviously they're hoping that things are going to get back to running and that this measure can go through.
Right, but Trump has already waived the sanctions. To get a permanent repeal of the sanctions, you have to get the Congress to vote, right? That's the issue.
Exactly. Yes, that is the issue. And so he's trying to get people on side. And this, Shara's history of being Al-Qaeda leader and then of the massacres against minorities has really spooked a lot of people. And so it's a tough campaign. And the president is, putting his shoulder to the wheel and saying we don't have a plan B. There is nobody else. We need this guy to succeed. And I think there's more to it than just trying to make Syria great again. President Trump is having a hard time with his Arab allies and Turkey because of Gaza, because of what's happening in Lebanon. And in many ways, he is throwing them a bone, or let's say he's making a deal in which he is attempting to deliver Syria and stability and economic growth in Syria. So refugees, the millions of Syrian refugees that have poured out of that country into Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, so forth, can go home again. The Arabs all want stability and economic growth in Syria and a unification of the country. And so Trump is trying to help them with that. And obviously, he wants them to be patient with Gaza, with Lebanon, and with other issues where he has a much more difficult road ahead.
But in terms of relieving the sanctions, already Senator Jean Shaheen of New Hampshire, she has come forth with a bill, just, a clean bill, if you will. Another one drafted by Senator Lindsey Graham has some conditions on it. And apparently, any conditions on a deal to get rid of sanctions would be detrimental. So, and Shaheen, of course, has just signed on to do it. She's one of the 8 that did what many people consider to be a cave-in on the part of the Democratic senators, which I don't know where she stands in after that. But what do you make of that? I mean, you say it's now before the House, the Senate has already weighed in, but are there enough sort of AIPAC pro-Israel Congress people there to scuttle it?
That's the question. And there is some arm wrestling because Israel doesn't want to let Syria completely off the hook. Israel and the United States have two different views of shutdown. The U.S. is trying to do its Arab allies a favor and help him get out from underneath sanctions and build up Syria. And they want Syria to be an ally of the West and to dump Russia. And we have to remember that Shara just went to Russia last month. So he's trying to play all of his cards. He doesn't want, he needs American help. He's using what leverage he can. But Israel has a very different view of Shara. And they think, a leopard doesn't change his spots so quickly. We don't trust him. He is allied with Turkey. We don't want the Turks to rebuild his military and to make Syria strong and then have a strong Turkey on our border. And Israel believes that, Turkey has supported Hamas leaders. And Israel increasingly sees Turkey as an enemy. So Shara then becomes an enemy. And they don't want a strong Syria or a united Syria. They want a divided Syria. And Israel has demanded that Shara not move any Syrian military south of Damascus. They want that entire region as a buffer zone, which of course has infuriated Damascus. And so Damascus is coming to Washington in many ways and to Trump to say, you need to rein in Israel and you need to help me because I have to rebuild. And that's, so there is a sort of an arm wrestle going on between Shara and Israel over America's favor here.
But there's also an arm wrestle going on between Turkey and Israel to dominate Syria. So
Absolutely.
is the U.S. trying to build it up so that it can be independent of both Turkey and Israel?
Yes, it is. But mostly the United States is worried that it's two of its closest allies in the Middle East, Israel and Turkey, are going to come to blows over Syria. And it doesn't want that. It needs to find a way to adjudicate this. And that's why people are talking about Syria joining the Abraham Accords or a military agreement and really perhaps even a peace agreement between Syria and Israel. Israel, of course, is lobbying Washington to just yesterday, Israeli ambassador working for the WINEP, Washington Institute for Near East Policy in Washington today, he wrote, Israel wants no troops south of Damascus. It wants a corridor to the Jebel Druze. And so Israel wants to be able to overfly Syrian territory if it feels like Turkey is building it up or there's any hostile movement. Obviously, Shara does not want Israel, to be able to overfly Syria at will and bomb. We have to remember that Israel has bombed Syria 500 times since the new regime took power, over the last year. And Shara is trying to put an end to that. Israel doesn't want to give up that right because they see if Shara is going to take Turkish anti-aircraft missiles, Turkish planes, helicopters. Israel doesn't want them to be built up, the Syrian military to be built up. So this is Washington is right in the middle of these negotiations, and it's got a very tough row to hoe here.
Well, of course, Trump was introduced to the Syrian leader last May in Saudi Arabia by Mohammed bin Salman, who's clearly has some traction with Trump and his family since he's given Jared Kushner a couple of $1 billion. And at that meeting, Trump praised Shara and told reporters that he's young, attractive guy, tough guy, strong past, very strong past, fighter, the usual sort of Trump macho stuff. So that, I suppose, indicates the Saudis. So this is basically a deal where the Saudis are pushing one direction and the Israelis the other, right?
You're absolutely right. And I think Trump wants to give this one to the Saudis. He wants to give Syria as in a sense, a demonstration to America's Arab allies and Turkish allies that we haven't abandoned you, on Gaza and other places. We're going to deliver Syria to you. You have to help me deliver Gaza. And in a sense, I think there's a little, there's a transaction going on here, and that's why Shara and Trump are in a sense closing ranks here, even though Israel is quite concerned about it. But Israel is not without instruments. Israel has a lot of sway in Congress, and this measure has to get through Congress. And so, everybody's weighing in here.
Right, but it doesn't make any sense to destabilize Syria. If the Israelis don't want the country to be rebuilt, and they want it weak and divided and dangerous, I don't get that, because the World Bank's estimating it's going to cost about $216 billion to rebuild Syria.
Right.
And they're in desperate shape, and this government clearly wants to stabilize the place and be able to deliver because the people, they obviously they huge relief. They got rid of the Assad mafia family that has been, suppressing them for decades. But they also want to be fed. They want to have jobs, etc. So I don't see the Israeli strategy as being particularly far-sighted.
Well, I think Henry Kissinger once said, and he said this to Golda Meir, the Israeli prime minister, that a nation that's looking for absolute security, which Israel is here, that means that its neighbors are going to have absolute insecurity. And to a certain degree, that's the situation today. Israel is the dominant power. Israel has destroyed Hezbollah, Hamas. It has really pinned back Iran's ears, and that entire axis of resistance, this big Shiite crescent that Iran had built, is in shambles today. And Israel stands bestride a Middle East in which it is really the reigning sort of local superpower. And the real question is, what will a new order be? The old order has been destroyed, but a new order has not yet been built. And to a certain degree, the United States and Israel are in discussion about what will that new order be, and will Syria and shut up be pro-Western, pro-American actors that can have a deal with Israel. And America's trying to get that deal. And it may not be everything Israel wants, but that's the question today.
Right, but on Thursday, the U.S. led a vote in the UN Security Council to get rid of UN sanctions against Shara and Syria. And then also Shara was the first Syrian president in decades to address the General Assembly at the United Nations recently in New York. So in terms of world opinion, there's no question that Israel's on its back foot. It's taken a huge black eye from what it's been doing in Gaza. So I think probably, world opinion is probably in favor of Shara as opposed to Netanyahu.
Yes, world opinion seems to be lining up. And England, France, others have been supporting Shara because they also want refugees to go home. Um, Germany just the other day denied several Syrians refugee status and said you need to go home because there's stability in Syria. So everybody wants to see Syria stabilized and growing again, and Syrians being able to build their country. And you're right. I think that they are leery of Israel's intentions in Syria. On the other hand, Israel has a lot of power and it can do what it wants. And it isn't clear that President Trump is going to, it's not clear how much President Trump will push back on that because um, we've seen Israel reach out. Just a few months ago, Israel bombed the Ministry of Defense in Damascus and said it would bomb the president's palace if he didn't stop sending troops south of Damascus and he didn't stop attacking the Druze in southern Syria.
Right, but that was pretty disgusting. I mean,
It was.
attacking
But those things
The Druze
may
are really
happen again.
special people. So, but you mentioned Shara went to Moscow to meet with Putin. Recently, Assad is there, the dictator that fled there, and they put him up in whatever kind of palace they can give him.
He owns two skyscrapers in downtown Moscow. He's not living he's living
Right.
very well.
But he was poisoned recently, so Russian security is not looking that good. I mean, it looked like
Well,
the Al Sharon company tried to kill him and came close.
I guess they're going to be looking for him.
Right.
They would like to finish him off. There's no
That's
doubt.
for sure. So, what's the story then with Austin Tice, the American ex-Marine journalist who was captured, what, 10 years ago at least?
More than that, yes. 2012, I
Yeah,
believe he was captured.
right,
And, he was in a prison in Syria. We know for a year or two he tried to escape. He was caught again, and then he disappears.
right.
It seems that some Syrian group that captured him this after he escaped.
Hmm.
Uh, it's not clear exactly what's happened, but it seems like he was killed. At least that's what this Syrian general who was interviewed said happened to him. Now, who killed him and under what circumstances, we're not sure. But there's still hope. His parents are still holding out hope that he could be alive. And but that hope is getting thinner and thinner as time goes on because there hasn't been any trace of him so
Right.
far.
Well, CNN recently had an interview with one of Assad's executioners. I don't know how the guy's still alive. The first thing he said to the CNN reporter is, "How did you find me?" Which indicates that he's terrified, of course. Um, but he's still alive. And he said no, he's been dead for a long time. Do you
Right.
know? Do you know about that exchange?
Yes. Yes. And that's the general that I was talking about.
Right.
So, he said that yes, he said that he was killed and that he's been dead. Now, but not everybody believes everything that comes out of his mouth because he's on the lam,
Hmm.
and perhaps he's trying to, we're not sure how much he knows.
Right. But just in the last minute, the Russians are still there, and you would think, of course, we don't know about Trump. He's more pro-Russian than he is pro-NATO. So I'm not sure about, when you say, you think that the Americans would want to get the Russians out of there. What's just the likely fate of the Russians there? Because they're hanging by a thread.
They are hanging by a thread. On the other hand, they're offering Syria important things like military help, anti-aircraft missiles. I don't know if they've offered them, but they could provide them. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if they're dangling those things in front of Shara. Now, Shara went to Moscow, clearly in an effort to see what can the Russians offer me, and use that as leverage on his trip to Washington. Um, so he's keeping the Russian card on the table.
Mm.
And
Well, that's
and
what I
Syria
wonder
went
about
to the
that.
Russian.
What does the Russian card mean when you got somebody like Trump who seems to defer to Putin at every opportunity? But we'll see, I guess.
Right. Well,
Well,
he needs to build up his military, and he needs to he needs to counter Israel and
right.
stop Israel from just overflying the country at will. And he's hoping that America can do that for him. But if America won't, he needs a backup, a plan B. And that's why he's keeping the Russian card in his back pocket.
Well, Joshua Landis, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Pleasure, Ian, always.
And again, I've been speaking with Joshua Landis, who's the Sandra Mackey Chair and Director of the Center for Middle East Studies and the Farzaneh Family Center for Iranian and Persian Gulf Studies at the University of Oklahoma, the past president of the Syrian Studies Association. He is a fellow at the Quincy Institute and writes Syria Comment, a daily newsletter and blog on Syrian politics. We can take a brief station break, back assessing Secretary of Defense Hegseth's meeting with defense contractors on Friday and how he plans to go to war with Venezuela. Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Jennifer Kavanagh, who is a Senior Fellow and Director of Military Analysis at Defense Priorities, where her research focuses on U.S. military strategy, force structure and defense budgeting, the defense industrial base, and U.S. military deployments and interventions. Previously, she was a Senior Fellow at the American Statecraft Program at the Canadian Endowment for International Peace, and she has an article at Responsible Statecraft. Hegseth dropped a big Venezuela Easter egg into Quantico speech. Welcome to Background Briefing, Jennifer Kavanagh.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. And before we talk about your article, I wanted to touch on the fact that on Friday, Defense Secretary Hegseth gave a speech to about 200 defense industry executives, senior military officers, and congressional staff members at the National War College, which he said, "Today, at my direction, the defense acquisition system, as you know it, is dead. It's now the warfighting acquisition system. This isn't just a name change. We are not building for peacetime. We are pivoting the Pentagon and our industrial base to a wartime footing, building for victory should our adversaries FAFO, which stands for F around and find out." So, the macho bluster aside, what is this about, do you think, Jennifer? Because obviously the inventories for a lot of American military equipment are depleted because of supporting the Israelis in the war in Gaza and Ukrainians defending themselves against the Russians. And also, as Hegseth said in his speech, our warfighters, as you know, can't wait decades for the tools they need to deter and fight our wars. The current pace of technological innovation is unprecedented. And of course, he's referring in part to the use of drones and the extent to which the Ukrainians have been building up their own industrial base, responding to the latest technology in the battlefield.
Yeah, well, Secretary Hegseth is absolutely correct that the current U.S. defense industrial base is not fit for purpose. It moves too slowly. It doesn't have the surge capacity that's required. It produces some of the wrong stuff. It doesn't have the right workforce. So there's a lot of problems. There are problems in the Pentagon processes as well, a lot of red tape, extensive detailed requirements that make it really difficult for defense contractors to produce things that meet the Pentagon specifications on any sort of reasonable timeline. And so I certainly commend the effort to come up with a new set of ideas for how these problems could be remedied, how we could build a defense industrial base that is more nimble and more agile, that makes use of commercial off-the-shelf technologies, that reforms the way the process works in the Pentagon for acquisitions as well as foreign military sales. I think that some of the ideas in Hegseth's speech Friday were new things or things that have been thrown around by others in this space for some time. But I think an important point is that pretty much every administration, going back as far as I can remember, has come in and tried to do something like this, tried to address these problems. And so far, we've seen very little success. So I think the test is whether these ideas are implemented in a way that past plans and promises have not been. I think there's a couple of obstacles. The first is that some of these things that Hegseth suggests require legal changes or new congressional authorizations. So the ability to do these things quickly may not pan out. And the second is that some of the constraints that Hegseth is pushing against are systemic and structural. Expanding defense industrial base capacity cannot be done overnight. Building the right defense industrial workforce cannot be done quickly. So I think that the ideas are great, but really the proof will be in the implementation.
So, in terms of the military-industrial complex, when Eisenhower first drafted the speech, his brother Milton wrote it with him. He used the phrase, the military-industrial congressional complex, decided to take the Congress part out of that speech, not to sort of insult the Congress, but it basically is really a part of the mix here. And quite often, Congress people, particularly powerful Congress people who control key committees, etc., push for weapon systems that are built in their districts that sometimes are absolutely useless, or they build, thousands of C-130s because of, the plant down in Georgia. There's a real history of this. So, is he addressing any of that?
It doesn't seem so in this speech. I agree certainly that politics plays a big role in this, and that Congress can be the biggest obstacle to addressing some of the challenges in the defense industrial base and its ability to meet warfighter needs. I think the littoral combat ship is a great example. Everyone agrees that the littoral combat ship is basically useless. It doesn't serve any of the missions that it's supposed to. It's badly constructed and is rarely able to go to sea because it keeps breaking. And yet we continue to purchase new ones because of powerful lobbies, both among the defense contractors as well as in Congress, that get benefits, political benefits, economic benefits from continuing to produce this specific platform. And I didn't see anything specific in the speech that would address some of these political constraints. And that's why I am a little bit skeptical about whether or not the changes that Hegseth has proposed here will actually end up having the revolutionary change that he hopes. To me, the biggest and most important thing in the speech was the statement that the DoD would focus on, or I guess now DOW, the Department of War, would now focus on commercial off-the-shelf technologies first, rather than going to bespoke production that is built specifically for the Department of Defense. And that, I think, if it pans out, would be a big change in the way the department operates and would be a significant step towards speeding up the process, because these very detailed and very rigid requirements that the military services often provide defense contractors is one of the reasons why a lot of these technologies and programs that are seen as revolutionary or likely to change the capabilities that our warfighters have never actually get into their hands.
So he's obviously taking a cue from the Ukrainians, right, and what they've done with off-the-shelf stuff and continuing updating the software on their drones and just, pulling stuff from commercial shelves, etc. And also the Ukrainians, I think, have also discovered that a lot of the big ticket items that were dribbled in very slowly by Biden, and I guess Trump has even cut the pipeline altogether, they haven't been particularly helpful. The M1A1 Abrams tanks, etc. So the big ticket items sometimes don't work, and these off-the-shelf things cobbled together seem to be really where the future of warfare lies.
Well, certainly the Ukrainian example is one that's motivating a lot of the changes in the way that the Pentagon is thinking about defense procurement and the types of capabilities that warfighters will need in the future. You're absolutely right that the role that commercial off-the-shelf technologies have played in Ukraine has been immense, and the Ukrainians have been very skilled in taking whatever is available and adapting it to their purposes. And that is an example that I think the U.S. military is hoping to emulate. But the push to use commercial off-the-shelf technologies is not something that's just come up in the past few years. I mean, you can go back to the Iraq War, at least, when the efforts to develop new armored vehicles for soldiers who were being killed in large numbers by small roadside bombs, IEDs. The MRAP, which was the military system developed to help protect soldiers better, relied heavily on things that were already commercially available for other purposes, and they were repurposed for DoD's needs, and that helped to allow this requirement to be met at a very rapid rate. So we have examples where the military has already done this. They already know this lesson. But the challenge is that the Pentagon is very concerned about things like information security and trying to use the latest, greatest technology, what Hegseth referred to as the 100% solution, where the 85% solution might be good enough. And so I think that's something that he said yesterday in his speech, that the department would shift to looking for the 85% solution. If the department is actually able to do that, that would be a big step in the right direction, in my opinion.
Right, but the Pentagon's always built a Rolex instead of a Timex. I mean, isn't that the major problem?
Yes, exactly. The problem is going for these high-end things when something a little bit less good that you could get fast would be better.
So let's talk about your article then. Hegseth dropped big Venezuela Easter egg into Quantico's speech, where he gathered all of the generals and admirals together, and Trump also spoke. 800 of the flag officers, generals, etc., were there back in September the 30th. This is Hegseth. They said the United States has not won a major theater war since the name was changed to the Department of Defense in 1947. One conflict stands out in stark contrast, the Gulf War. Why? Well, there's a number of reasons, but it was a limited mission with overwhelming force and a clear end state. So is that the new Trump doctrine that Vice President J.D. Vance has announced?
It seems to me that this is a pretty clear message of the way that the administration sees and would like to use military force. They are certainly not hesitant to do so. This is not a restraint administration. But they do prefer large, overwhelming displays of military force, limited duration, limited aims, and in pursuit of what they see as core U.S. objectives. We've seen Trump in many cases pursue this model. We saw it in Iran in June of this year. We saw it in his first term in the strike on Qasem Soleimani. We see it now with the strikes on the drug boats. These are things that are powerful shows of U.S. military force that do not risk entanglement in long ground wars, which Trump has repeatedly stated a clear aversion to.
Right, but they don't really apply to Russia or China. They only apply to smaller countries that can't really fight back, right? I mean, the drug boat stuff it seems more theater than anything else, because they killed a whole bunch of people aboard these drug boats. And as far as I know, drug smugglers don't put a lot of people aboard their boats because they want to fill it up with product.
I think you're 100% right. This is a limited model. It works against adversaries, state and non-state, that can't strike back. We have yet to see how Trump would respond if there were a serious military threat from a near-peer adversary like China or like Russia. These are tests that Trump hasn't had to face yet. However, this overwhelming use of force model doesn't work very well when your adversary can match your level of force. So if you think about a Taiwan contingency, any sort of war over Taiwan is going to be a protracted one. This idea of a short, quick display of force that allows the U.S. to stay uninvolved in any sort of major way that doesn't put U.S. lives at risk, that's very unlikely or impossible. And so I think that there are two options here. One explanation is that Trump actually really doesn't want to fight these long, protracted wars. He's not interested in using military force in that way, and will do everything possible to keep the U.S. out of those wars. That would be a good thing, in my view. We should prioritize preventing war with Russia and China, because either would be catastrophic. The other is that there is an effort here to fight a war with a near-peer adversary with overwhelming force, or a belief that that is possible, that is an achievable objective. And that would be very dangerous, in my view, because the effort to build up the military capabilities to fight a war in that way, or the tactics that would be required, such as strikes on mainland China or other very high escalatory moves, would bring the potential for strikes on the U.S. homeland or nuclear war.
Well, there seems to be something is is brewing there off the coast of Venezuela with all those military assets. And I was struck by the fact, Jennifer, that the head of Southcom stepped down. And we don't know why, but my suspicion is that I mean, nobody, I think, in the Pentagon that's got any brains thinks very highly of Hegseth. I mean, he's fired all of the competent top women and the top minority generals and admirals. I mean, there's a racist tone to it. There's just this contempt for expertise, which is a big part of the MAGA world, and all this focus on wokeness, whatever the hell that is. So my suspicion is that the head of Southcom quit because the Russians have given the Venezuelans some sophisticated anti-ship missiles. Then you've got this big fleet off there, and particularly the biggest ship in the Navy, which is the USS Gerald Ford. It's not out of the question that if this goes kinetic, this show of force turns into a little war, the Venezuelans could do some serious damage to the U.S. I mean, and you could even have a situation like in 1898 with the sinking of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor, which led to the Spanish-American War.
I agree 100% that any sort of kinetic operation against Venezuela would be quite dangerous and quite risky for the United States. And it's one of my biggest concerns. The history of U.S. military interventions tells us a couple of things pretty clearly. The first is that regime change operations don't work, and that could mean a number of things. First of all, kinetic strikes on Venezuela may not force Maduro out of power if that's the goal. They're unlikely to stop or damage cartels or drug smuggling operations. This idea of striking land targets from the sea or from the air is basically what the U.S. tried to do against the Houthis, and it didn't even work against them. Maduro's regime and the cartels are very much more entrenched than that. So I think it's likely to fail in that respect. If it were successful, if Maduro's regime did collapse, there's no guarantee that would be a good outcome either. It could lead to state failure. There's no promise that it leads to any sort of stable government. And we also know that a lot of times the U.S. goes in with the idea of having a limited war and ends up getting dragged in much deeper. I mean, nation building wasn't the initial point of Afghanistan, and yet we were there for 20 years doing it. So there's a potential for this to explode into something that becomes much different than the initial intentions suggested. But the second thing it tells us is that military interventions can go wrong in a whole host of ways that aren't anticipated in the start. And this gets at your point about the potential for the Venezuelan military to do damage to the U.S. military in unexpected ways. It's not a guarantee that an aircraft doesn't get shot down or a ship doesn't get hit by a missile or something else that then requires the U.S. to send in more forces or to get involved with a ground operation. Even if that's not what Trump desires, even if that doesn't fit with his model of military force or this Trump doctrine, it could end up happening simply because military interventions often go wrong and they often go in ways that leaders don't expect. And they often last much longer than intended. So there are a number of reasons why any sort of kinetic operation in Venezuela or in the Caribbean more generally would be very dangerous and very risky for the administration and for the United States.
Well, Jennifer Kavanagh, thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you very much for having me.
And again, I've been speaking with Jennifer Kavanagh, who's a Senior Fellow and Director of Military Analysis at Defense Priorities, where her research focuses on U.S. military strategy, force structure and defense budgeting, the defense industrial base, and U.S. military deployments and interventions. Previously, she was a Senior Fellow in the American Statecraft Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and she has an article at Responsible Statecraft, Hegseth Dropped Big Venezuela Easter Egg into Quantico's Speech. And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Sasha Linden Cohen, and Asher Price. If you missed any of today's program or would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we include extended interviews searchable by topic and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates that provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on those platforms. Find us on Twitter and Facebook, as well as also now on Blue Sky at Ian Masters Media. And please do help us reach more listeners by sharing the program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help us sustain this program into the future and ensure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back again tomorrow with another background briefing, and I'm always available at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.